federal employee should not be able to make money betting on the same government decisions they help carry out, hear about first, or influence from the inside. Simply put, this is about trust in institutions, and if people lose faith that government decisions are being made in the public interest, then institutions stop functioning the way they're supposed to. It's not always one giant scandal or smoking gun. The risk being run is a slow erosion over time. It's death by a thousand cuts. Losing public trust has far reaching implications through all levels of government and society. The most obvious issue here is the conflict of interest of using non public information for personal financial gain. If the conflict of interest is the loaded gun, then abuse is pulling the trigger. Good ethics rules do not wait for the shot to be fired. In public institutions, the standard is not don't commit a provable crime. The standard is also impartiality, integrity, and public confidence. That's why ethics laws exist in the first place. If the standard were only punish abuse after it is clearly proven, then we would not have things like judicial recusal rules, disclosure rules, gift restrictions, or anti-nepotism rules in the first place. Those rules exist because the structure and appearance of impartiality matter more before abuse occurs. And that is exactly the problem here. The current system asks, how can you prove they traded illegally? But the better question is, why are they allowed to be in that position at all? A conflict of interest is not the same thing as proven abuse. It is the condition that creates serious risk and undermines trust whether or not abuse can be proven. And this abuse is not hypothetical. There are examples, including through a Polymark trader who made $400,000 betting on the capture of Nicolas Maduro, and another bet where the White House press secretary made a speech that lasted for less than 65 minutes. They profited because the speech abruptly ended 30 seconds before the 65-minute mark. More recently, there's been bets surrounding the Iran war, as well as the prices or the manipulation of oil price. And six newly created accounts made around $1.2 million betting on when Trump would strike Iran. 40 lawmakers, as early as March 30th, which was less than a week ago, have signed a letter petitioning the CFTC to investigate these things, proving that this is a known issue. And the key issue here is the advantage doesn't have to come from a clean, provable leak. It can come from timing, it can come from personal internal awareness, it can come from knowing something is likely to happen. It doesn't have to be a single classified document. From the outside, the public can't tell the difference of a lucky bet or a well-timed insider bet. That uncertainty alone is corrosive and why the current laws are inadequate. Lastly, my opponent may say that the current laws are adequate as they are. Some of them are, but the rules are not enough because they are mostly reactive and not preventative. They work best against the cleanest and dumbest cases after the fact when you can prove exactly what someone knew and when they knew it. Prediction markets are dangerous precisely because they reward the gray zone of timing, internal awareness, and plausible deniability. The standard for public institutions cannot be, it's probably fine. Thank you.
Yeah, so question, do all federal employees have access to information before the public does?
So that's a bit of an open question. I think it's an obvious no. Not all, like the janitors, probably don't have access to privileged information, like
I
offhand.
would say most of them don't, because I mean, like the post office employees definitely don't. Like obviously you mentioned the janitors and stuff. So I mean, your problem seems to be mostly like with like obscure bets on like Polymarket. I mean, couldn't we just limit what people could bet on instead of just banning federal employees from all prediction markets?
So I think that that creates more administrative oversight. When, for example, let's say that we allow for maybe something like sports bettings. Well, what if a political figure or Trump is going to make a speech, say at a football game or something, if they're going to wear a specific color tie at some event? So there's a lot of cross where I don't think you can cleanly separate these things. And the point is that it's an overall principle or an overall rule, and because they are in a position where they may be able to get access to information, I think it's better to just have a blanket rule that says they're not allowed to do it.
Uh, so I mean, I can understand mostly like the argument for like appointed and elected officials, but why like the regular federal employees?
Right. So this is referred to as I guess would be a bright line ethics rule. So it's supposed to be a clean line, and part of the reason is I think to avoid any ambiguity. Part of the initial reason I said in my opening was that these things have to be proven after the fact. So who knew what and when? It's a lot more administrative oversight, a lot more cost that goes into trying to do these micro policings of certain things. So I think that's why a ban outright would be a cleaner solution.
Yeah, but doesn't banning stuff just drive the issues underground and prevent disclosure?
So disclosure, I would say it there can be a tracking of wrongdoing, but I don't think that sorry, I don't think that disclosure actually solves the issue. Again, think of it as a preventative versus after the fact. So a disclosed conflict would still be a conflict. I don't think that disclosing it solves the core issue here.
Fair enough. We have 30 seconds left, so I don't think we have time for another question. Yeah, so prediction markets derive their value from the aggregation of diverse information from private sources to estimate the probability of events. This includes things like sports betting, political betting on things like poly market, and then also future bettings on stocks. Uh, what do all of these things have in common? They're effectively gambling. Why should we ban federal employees from gambling? It's an absurd proposition. You can claim this is for insider trading purposes, uh, but banning them from all forms of prediction betting is just preventing to prevent them from doing insider trading is ridiculous overreach. There's already bans on insider trading, including the insider trading on prediction markets for the economy. Uh, we can agree that they don't really enforce this though, uh, and there are ways to achieve what we would be trying to achieve with this that don't limit what 2.2 million federal employees can do in their free time. The best way that we could get rid of these is remove the House Ethics Committee and create an independent ethics enforcement agency that the head of which is elected and not appointed to limit the bias as much as possible. But obviously, that's an unlikely and unrealistic proposition because it would require a uh, addition to the Constitution, and we're not going to get that anytime soon. Uh, Alternatively, we could require all elected and appointed officials to put their assets in a blind trust while they hold office. That is the most realistic thing that we could do, and that we can require and should require. Another important aspect of this is that banning things like this just drive it underground. So instead of stopping people like Nancy Pelosi from doing sketchy shit in the stock market, we just get Nancy Pelosi doing sketchy shit in the stock market without the disclosure of what she's doing. Which is why, if you value government transparency, we shouldn't want this. Why should we want to make it easier for the government to hide what they are doing? The biggest thing here, though, is why should we prevent regular federal employees from betting in prediction markets? If a postal worker wants to bet on the election and bet on companies' futures or bet on their favorite sports team, we shouldn't be in the wallet of 2.2 million federal employees telling them what they can and can't spend their money on. And if they get rich off of doing it, they can quit their shitty underpaid jobs. So good for them. And I see the rest of my time.
So Vigi, so just so we can kind of find some common ground here at a basic level, do you agree that there are at least some cases where it would be inappropriate for a federal employee to bet on the prediction market? Are there examples that you could think of?
I would, generally speaking, I would say just like elected and appointed officials, and only that.
So when you say elected and appointed, do you mean like betting on the outcomes of elections or?
No, I mean like the only
Oh,
federal
oh,
employees I would
oh, I
say
see. To who it
are,
applies to.
yeah, are the ones that are appointed and ones who are elected. Anybody other than that, I don't see a actual point to it.
Okay. Um, so so would you say that at least from I guess the outside looking in, so from the public looking at this, would you at least agree that that it's not clear to the public whether something can be a lucky bet or whether it's a well-timed insider bet? Do you think that there's an appearance of malfeasance, even if there may not be?
Not necessarily. I'm pretty sure most people just assume somebody got lucky unless who made the bet is actually disclosed. We could think of examples of this, like with the GameStop stuff, where they were trying to fucking tank GameStop by shorting it in the stock market, doing shorting bets. Um, and a bunch of like big name people were betting on that, and including some Congress people. And then they end up losing a fuckload of money because of, well, the internet.
Okay, I got a quick two-part question. So, I think you had mentioned this in your opening. So, would you advocate for maybe something like just better disclosure, like better transparency, or is that something you do think it's sort of okay as it is?
Better transparency. Like my main focus whenever it comes to like reforming the financials of people elected and appointed officials is primarily transparency, and then the fact that I don't necessarily think while they're in office they should have any control of their money at all. I think their money should be put into blind trusts.
Okay. So sorry. Trades. Okay, applying trust. Sorry, I'm just making a note of that here. I'm just having 30 seconds. I could throw another one there. Let's see. Um, so so just to be clear, I want to kind of drive this point home. Do you think that? Well, you say you don't necessarily think it leads to the impropriety or like a looks like something wrong is happening. Do you think at the very least that this could erode public trust in institutions? Do you think that the appearance of corruption can do this?
Not with futures betting. I think the insider trading stuff for the most part is what does that. Which and the reason for that is because the house pretty much has control on whether or not those ethics things are actually enforced, and the house doesn't actually enforce them.
Sure. So one of the things you brought up was possibly an ethics board, and you said that 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 wouldn't happen because of the Constitution, all of these things. Even just kind of at the end there, you mentioned how the House doesn't really, I guess, do its job, quote unquote. It sounds like you're sort of tacitly admitting that there is a problem, at least that needs to be addressed. But when I asked you some of these clarifying questions, I think the main one being the first one there, where if you would agree that maybe there are some cases, and you did say for elected and appointed officials, but so you're limiting your scope specifically to those people when any federal employee
Hmm.
could access information. Um, I can give you an example, and why I would even say for janitors or maybe people who work at whatever these other places, lower level people. Um, there are interdepartmental, interagencies issues. Sometimes things will go through one department before another. It doesn't have to be stealing a classified document. It could just be having the foreknowledge, maybe hours before something happens. It could be seeing just a memo or an email chain that makes it by you, right? So I don't think that the barrier is very high, and I think that's why I would put much more scrutiny on beyond just people who are elected or appointed.
Yeah, but I mean, with anybody, I mean, with doing this kind of thing in general, it's still kind of more a innocent till proven guilty type of thing. You're just kind of assuming that the people that are making these lucky bets are people who have insider knowledge when we, because of the fact that for the most part they're undisclosed, we don't have any proof of that.
I agree on its face, and I think one of the things I said in my opening is I think the what I would view as the problem, which you seem to disagree with, is I think that there is something to be said about optics. When I'm talking about things like integrity and public trust, even the appearance that something corrupt is happening is enough to corrode public trust. And so
Yeah, but I
even if
mean,
and
we're talking about gambling. We're basically just talking about gambling, though. Like the gambling in
so there's
general
different types of gambling.
erodes the trust
So
of an
there's
institution. Like
gambling.
we can look at sports betting here, and sports betting, like when we look at sports betting, it like because of the higher influence of casinos and stuff in sports betting, people now believe like the MLB is rigged. They believe the NFL is rigged. They would believe the NBA is rigged.
Sure,
Like
sure,
this happens in
and
general just because of gambling.
right. Well, so there, I would say there's a massive difference between somebody, even if it is rigged. I would say there's a massive difference between somebody thinking that a sports game is rigged versus real world events where you're monetizing your proximity the government power. So some of the examples I brought up, for example, or one of the examples, sorry, the easiest one that comes off the top of my head is the $400,000 that somebody made off Polymarket when Nicolas Maduro was arrested. And this bet was made, I believe, hours before this had happened. Another example is before Iran was bombed, literally within hours, 6 separate Polymarket accounts made $1.2 million. So I think that it seems like a lot of smoke for no fire. And when we're saying we don't know who it is, I understand prediction markets can be linked back to the original person. They're pseudo anonymous, so there's wallets, and then there's sort of a chain
Mm-hmm.
that you can follow. If the government really decides to, they could subpoena, they could maybe try to access these records, find out who made these trades. There doesn't seem to be that much interest in doing that. And I'm just going to tie that in really quick with what I said before about administrative costs to try to micro police all of these separate things because we don't know if it's somebody who's right next to Trump or we don't know if it's some pencil pusher down below. All of these people work with sensitive information, right? Or potentially come across sensitive information. And so I think that there's a higher burden that is placed on them. And one of the reasons why it's cleaner, again, cleaner just to not allow them to participate in these markets. It's more than just gambling,
Well, I
I guess
mean,
is what I'm saying.
here here's the thing, like, even if say we did your proposition, we would still get these lucky bets because like here's the thing, like even if this is insider trading, which is it would be enforceable and they could still go to jail if we actually had an enforcement mechanism for it because insider trading in general is already illegal, and that's what this would be. But the reason why we don't have that enforcement is because that enforcement is one left up to the FBI, two is left up to the House Ethics Committee, and nobody's going to investigate the government because we don't have anybody to investigate the government. I mean, we can see this with a lot of different things that have happened. We know of a lot of Congress people who do insider trading in the stock market, and including like the famous example that the right always likes to bring up, being Nancy Pelosi. Um, there's so many. The issue here isn't like the access in general; it's the fact that it's not enforced.
Well, sure, but it's one of those things where it sounds a little bit like, well, we've tried nothing and nothing can be done. I mean, in the case of these things, we're saying, well, the principle that I'm laying out is that something should be done, something ought to be done about these things, as opposed to again, it sounds like you're ceding a little bit that you're saying that there is a problem that even you're identifying here that does exist. So if you're saying, well, it's not properly enforced, I can agree with you on that front, right? So I'm advocating that these things shouldn't be allowed, and I know there's a little bit of cross between prediction markets versus stocks, right? But I would also agree with the stock trading. I do think that there are examples where people sit on boards, security boards and things, and they've made stock trades. And yes, there is some quote unquote disclosure that these things are publicly accessible, but there doesn't seem to be consequences. And so again, I think a cleaner option is just to not give them the option. And because again, even if things are above board and they're just great at predicting these events or whatever it may be, the appearance
No,
of
but like
corruption
the
is the
the
issue.
the the thing that you're missing here is the fact that them doing that is already illegal. The problem is we don't enforce it
So
because
there's
the people who are meant to enforce that are the government. Like we don't have any oversight of the government, and that's the
sure.
problem.
So what we're talking on kind of both sides of the coin, right? So I'm talking more about a prophylactic type of step where we do something before the corruption is allowed. And I think I highlighted some of the issues. I think good ethics standards prevent abuse before they happen. And so I said, like judges recusing themselves, for example, there are anti-nepotism laws where we recognize that something can be ripe for abuse, and that's why we're trying to address it before the abuse can happen, as opposed to something has happened, now it has to be investigated. Now we have to prove what did they know, when did they know it, was it passed off through a family member? I know there's things with Pelosi, right? There were trades by her husband. People, and because the alternate line is, well, it's not going to stop them. What happens to them reaching out to their cousin or a friend, right? But just because
Mhm.
people will circumvent these things and try to get around them is not a reason not to try to enforce strong ethics standards to prevent them from abusing them.
Yeah, but at the same time, again, like when we're when we put these rules in place, like even say I grant that, and like we put this rule into place, it's not going to be enforced because of the mechanisms of enforcement. Like so, like there's some great examples here with like fucking the uh different people in Congress and different people in the government who have like or their family members have gotten caught doing or dealing drugs and then they just like don't go to jail. The issue here is not like that laws don't exist. It's that when you're talking about the government, the way the government works currently at least, the government is effectively above the law.
I agree. I feel like we're describing the same issue that we're both seeing, and we simply have different approaches to it. And so what I want to do is I'm not sort of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? I feel like that there are moments for nuance, right? Like if you were to come to me, and I guess I'm trying to make a little bit of an olive branch, and I'm saying, sure, if the category that these people are the federal employees are restricted to is only sports betting, I mentioned some issues that could potentially arise, but let's say it's something innocuous, right? It's not related to real world events that are happening. It's not the price of oil. It's not is the U.S. going to take Carg Island? It's not things that affect people's lives in a deep that deeply affect people's lives in a negative way. I might be more amicable to that because I agree that that does fall more on the side of simply gambling. But when we're talking about events that affect people in the real world, I think that having people in government who are not profiting, there's no perverse incentive, sorry, for them to be able to exploit real world events. I put that at such a high bar, and it's I don't want to gish gallop, but it's similar for people who are maybe police officers or people who work in the medical field. There are certain expectations when you have a certain job that you are expected to abide by, and so I would simply say that this would be part of their job. They're not being deprived of something. It's because we're putting trust into them that we have this high bar in the first place.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, we like say the example you used with like the Maduro arrest thing. Like, even if that was some random like federal employee, which it probably wasn't. It was probably some random dude who just got lucky. Um, like like if it's some random person at the Pentagon, who fucking cares? Like generally, genuinely, who cares? Like like if it's not some like actually elected official, we shouldn't care. Like these people, like yeah, they might have some more inside information, but like they're working really shitty jobs that they're most of them are getting underpaid for. So if they get a chance to actually make some real money off of like a lucky bet that they already had information about, who cares? Seriously.
Sure. So, what I said in my opening statement, so it sounds with that last little bit, I mean, I feel like you're ceding to basically that some corruption is okay, or that, well, they like, because we're saying, well, you're kind of maybe not quite speaking out both sides of your mouth, but you're saying, well, if it's some low.
Yeah, so you're talking about like how basically saying some level of corruption is okay. Which I mean to a degree that I am saying like some level of what you would consider corruption, uh, like whenever we're talking about the people who don't actually have power to make decisions, yeah, sure. Who actually cares? It's the people that can actually make the decisions that the corruption matters. If you can't make decisions, you being a little bit corrupt outside of like law enforcement, it doesn't matter.
All right, so since your ethical argument right now is kind of in the lead, I feel like it hasn't been addressed properly. I'm going to be a bit tougher on you with my question, just because I like to see a nice, fair debate that gets as close to even as possible.
Okay.
So, when Vidge was doing cross with you, he asked you about just banning the specific type of bets you wanted. The only question from cross that I thought really accomplished anything. He asked you, what kind of bets do you want to ban? Your response is, I don't want to ban those specific types of bets. That would be over-regulation. But your prescription here is to completely do pre-crime, essentially. Assume that these people are all borderline criminals just waiting for their opportunity to steal or deface the government or commit fraud in some way or blah, blah, blah. And you're essentially policing them to the point where they're not even allowed to participate in fully legal activities because they're potentially guilty actors. How is yours not significantly more regulatory and over policing if his suggestion is just to ban some bad bets?
So I ground this in the overall principle that I'm sort of coming at this from, which is that the especially with public office or people working for the federal government, I think that the image of corruption is almost just as important as if there is actually corruption. So I don't see this as a punitive thing. Um, I would say that another example, which I had brought up as well, would be that if you want to call it pre-crime, there are ethics standards with things where judges have to recuse themselves. There's anti-nepotism rules. There are disclosure rules, and these are designed to address things before they become an issue. So I would say that, yeah, it's not punishing, I guess, law-abiding people. It's sort of like one asshole drinks in the park and gets drunk, and now none of us can drink in the park. So, yeah.
So Vigi made the point that it's already illegal. Tessie, do you agree with that perspective? And if so, how should enforcement be fixed?
Yeah, so we didn't quite get into this. I did cite some specific laws that this does apply to in my links in the side there. Where is it? So sorry, could you just ask the question again real quick? I got a little sidetracked.
So Vigi had kind of described that practice as already being illegal. Do you agree with that characterization? And if so, how should enforcement be fixed?
Oh, sure. So there are things that are illegal, like insider trading. Sort of the point I was making before is that it's sort of again the prophylactic, addressing it before it's an issue versus trying to prosecute and address what criminal activity happened after the fact. So I would say that there are some laws on the books that do try to address some of these things. I would just say that they are currently inadequate. Does that answer your question?
Mhm.
His affirmative argument on the practical level, you guys have addressed it. You've only even come to some sort of mutual conclusion on it. But where he's not being met at is on his ethical argument. The only time you've addressed that, I feel like, was saying because of lack of enforcement, no matter what we do isn't going to work, which is a practical argument, but it's not addressing him ethically. So I want to give you a chance to re-ask one of his questions and give you a chance just to answer it like straight up without any debate pressure. Should we not hold those in government to a higher standard where they have to give up actions that a normal person might be able to do because they might morally compromise their position in the government or their authority they retain as somebody in the government? My example was going to be drug tests and not allowing police officers to do drugs because they're in a field where they're arresting people for drugs and they could easily develop some sort of addiction. So we hold him to a higher standard. He used nepotism and other things like that with judges. We already kind of do what he's prescribing. So why would this one be uniquely bad?
Yeah, so more so it's the mechanism of how he wants to do it. I mentioned in my opening statement, the way that I would actually want to fix this, more so because like the only part where I actually see an ethical problem is like appointed and elected officials, which is why we kind of came to the agreement on that. I don't see any ethical problems with like the people who can't make a decision, being able to do this personally. Um, but with elected and appointed officials specifically, the ones who actually can make the decisions, the solution that I would put in place instead of this is the requiring them to put their assets in a blind trust. This is something that's been talked about a lot for a while. I think it's even been proposed a couple times, but it hasn't gone through yet. And that is a better mechanism of enforcement, specifically for the people who are elected and appointed, that would actually achieve what he's trying to do.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Did you kind of described this as essentially just like gambling and kind of equated it to like sports betting?
Yeah, I equated them because they are effectively the same thing.
Cool. So employees of professional and collegiate sports teams are actually typically banned from betting on their own leagues. Could you maybe kind of like explain why that standard wouldn't apply to maybe politically influenced decisions on these markets, prediction markets.
So typically speaking, when we're talking about the people who are banned, the way, from my understanding with sports betting at least, the rules are specifically for the players and the coaches, which would effectively in this case be like the appointed officials and Congress. It doesn't apply to like the people that are working vending and the people who are working like the janitorial staff, things like that, because they have no effects on the game. Um, and it's the same with like Congress. Like you could validly make the argument for why we shouldn't allow people in Congress, people appointed in different positions, like the director of the FBI or like Pete Hegseth in the Department of War. Like those types of people like should not be able to make these bets, but anybody below them that actually doesn't have any power to make decisions, it really does not matter, just like it doesn't matter if a janitorial staff bets on a sports game.
So sure, I'll start my closing by just addressing some of the final points there that Vigi got across. One of them was, which was a bit surprising to me, is about the lower level employees, or he said that these should apply to elected officials and people who are appointed. I think my overall sort of thesis throughout this has been that I think from the public's perspective, it doesn't matter. If I hear $400,000, somebody got that money, I'm not splitting hairs on who it was. If it was the janitorial staff and somebody threw out a document and they managed to come across it and they gleaned some sort of information. If it was an email chain, I think that to the point about police officers, people who are medical professionals, depending on what your line of work is, there are certain expectations. And I do think that even the solution of the blind trust, to extend this, because again, I think it should apply to all federal employees, is I don't think that most federal employees would have the option of a blind trust. It does feel a bit idealistic. I do understand that part of his issue is the enforcement mechanism is not sufficient, and I would agree with that. And so I think that what you end up doing is you add more administrative oversight. It's actually more taxing to try and investigate these sort of microcosms and who knew what, when did they know it, are they predicting just because they're smart, good at guessing? And I think one of the things I have to address as well is why it's not like gambling, or it's not even like trading stocks. So with stocks, there's an outcome, right? But this you're betting on events, and events can be manipulated before the fact, right? I mean, obviously stocks can, if you have insider knowledge, which is illegal, you can guess, you can know if a stock is going to go up or down. This is also a source of controversy. I would say that we've seen certain suspicious trades happen before Trump posts on his Truth Social or makes some sort of speech. However, when we're talking about real world events and people profiting off of those things, there can be horrific consequences. One of the things, unfortunately, I didn't have time to get to, but is worth mentioning, is that the Polymarket, this was today, this news came out. Polymarket got slammed and they had to take down a poll which was betting on whether or not the service member that is missing right now in Iran would be rescued. And so, again, didn't quite get to this, unfortunately, but there is also deep moral implications to these things. I would feel uncomfortable with anybody betting on these things, and I'm not trying to introduce new information, but I think especially in the context of federal employees, again, I think that integrity and the perception of honesty is vitally important to maintaining trust in institutions. And yeah, that's why I would place that above, and I think that why it would be irresponsible to allow federal employees to gamble on world events, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing here is you've talked a lot about the appearance. Well, even with like if we put this law into place, the appearance wouldn't change. If people accurately guess this stuff, the appearance would still be there. The problem is the lack of transparency whenever it comes to this kind of stuff, the lack of enforcement, and those are the primary problems here. Yeah, sure, we ban them, and then what happens when people still successfully make these big bets on world events right before they happen, we're just going to assume, like, if this is what we're assuming, that it's government officials, we're just going to assume it was a government official still doing it regardless. So what we need to do is, specifically with the people who actually make the decisions, because the people that actually make the decisions being able to bet on this stuff is the real problem here. We need to fix the enforcement mechanisms, because they're, realistically speaking, is not currently an enforcement mechanism. Yes, this would add administrative oversight, but in order to actually fix the problem of the appearance of corruption in this case, we have to increase administrative oversight over the government, because it currently does not have any administrative oversight. You could claim that the FBI is administrative oversight, but it's not. It doesn't actually enforce laws whenever it comes to people who are actively in government. You can see this with insider trading. As far as the reason why I was talking about the stock trade and insider trading is because when it comes to insider trading in the stock trade, doing prediction bets as an elected official when you have insider information is considered insider trading. It is illegal for them to do that because it is insider trading. Now, the thing is, when we talk about, you kind of alluded to it's not really gambling, but it is gambling. It is gambling on whether or not a world event is going to happen. It's the same thing as sports betting. It's just doing it on elections. It's doing it on world events. It operates the exact same way. The odd, whether or not the odds of something are going to happen is based off of the amount of people placing bets on whether an event is going to happen or not. So, like, when we look at how sports betting works specifically, the way that the casinos determine odds is based off of the amount of people placing bets on one team winning. It works. It is functionally the same, but that's besides the point. In order to fix this, we actually need to increase oversight. We don't need to add another bullshit law that's not going to get enforced.